gave the title, Our God is a Sovereign God. It's kind of blend into 4th of July Independence Day, but in a different way. First, I need to share with you some background for this chapter itself. And we'll know some dates when Jeremiah was prophesying or doing his ministry in Judah. By that time, the kingdom of Israel was split into two, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Southern kingdom, 10 tribes got lost. And the southern kingdom remained as Jewish nation, what we know as the present-day Israel.
Northern kingdom.
No, southern kingdom. Northern kingdom is gone.
No, you said reverse.
Jeremiah, the background first, the Jeremiah was chosen by God to become a prophet at a very tender age. If you read first chapter 5 to 7 verses. Then he saw multiple kings of Judah during his prophetic ministry, starting from 627 BC to 580 BC. You know his contemporaries? Other prophets who served with him in different places? His contemporaries were Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Ezekiel was a little bit of. And also he was under Gentile kings, Assyrian kingdom and the Babylonian kingdom. Assyrian kingdom was defeated by the Babylonian kingdom kings, and they continued till the destruction of the Jerusalem and the temple. Chapter 1 to 2-3 cites the period of Jeremiah under king of Judah, Josiah, a very good king, 640 to 609. And Jehoiakim, a very bad king, 609 to 598. And Zedekiah was the last king that was captured, and his eyes were taken him to Babylon. And before his eyes, his children were killed. So, this is a little bit of a background where Jeremiah was at a tender age, started his ministry under King Josiah, the very good king. And he ruled 40 years, and he picked up in the middle with Josiah. And after his death, King Josiah's death, it was a very rough time for Israel as well as for prophet Jeremiah. And after the Jerusalem and the Jewish nation was destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar twice. And it was 605 and 598, and he took many people as captives from Jewish nation to Babylon. And during that time, after the destruction of Jerusalem temple, even prophet Jeremiah was imprisoned for some time. But this guy, Nebuchadnezzar's commander-in-chief, Nebuzaradan, allowed Jeremiah to live wherever he wants, and he removed his chains and let him go. But he suggested to go and live with one guy, a recently appointed governor, Gedaliah, over some provinces, and he was with Gedaliah for some time. And ultimately, Gedaliah was killed, and they were all scared, and some people took Jeremiah and his secretary, Baruch, to Egypt. So up to that point, we know then some scholars of the opinion that he died in Egypt, the Nile country. But if you read chapter 43 and 44, Jeremiah raised his voice against the Jews for the practice of idolatry. He was so much offended and hurt by their idolatrous behavior. So, Jeremiah, a Judean prophet, called to be a prophet at 13th year of King Josiah, around 627 to 626, he did his ministry for 4 decades in the country's history. So, the spiritual atmosphere after the death of King Josiah was shocking and so much troubled by good God-fearing Jews as well as prophet Jeremiah. And most commentators feel that Jeremiah was greatly influenced by the prophecies of Hosea. So I'm just throwing this, just to get a glimpse of Jeremiah's activities and his ministry and what he was going through. And this 29th chapter and the famous words from 10 to 14, especially the 11th verse, is quoted so many times, even as a birthday promise. On the greeting cards also you see that. But it's the most misquoted verse in the whole Bible. That was not what meant to be when the Lord was saying on the 11th chapter. We'll look into that. So, but let me introduce this 29th chapter, the whole chapter. In the verse 4 we will see, and this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. That means this happened after the destruction of the temple in 586 BC by Nebuchadnezzar. He destroyed the city as well as burnt the King Solomon's temple. And that's how the first temple was demolished and destroyed by a Babylonian king. God allowed it. So, this chapter was basically addressed to the surviving Jewish exiles in Babylon, because Jeremiah wrote this letter to the exiles in Babylon. It's a very interesting letter he writes to the Babylonian people, the exiles in Babylonia. So as I said that Judah was attacked in Jerusalem in 605 and 598, and there were many captives were taken to Babylon. But some sizable population was still in Jerusalem, and they would be gone by 586. That's the end of the story for some time. So in the light of the background and the context, we will study the passage. So verse 10 to 14 are most misquoted and taken out of context by many today. So some people even preach only on the 11th verse, that it is for each and every individual, but it's not meant to be that way. And many scholars of the same opinion, and I resonate with them, that it was written to the people of Israel, a group of people living in Babylon, in the exile. The Lord was telling them. So he said in the 4th verse that I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So this meant to be addressed to them. So the you used in here in these verses is not singular, it's plural, indicating the Jewish nation. So the promises recorded are not for individual people. God had plans for a whole group of people of the nation of Israel. So scriptures confirm the promises made were fulfilled. Jews in exile returned after 70 years of exile, and the nation of Israel was restored for some time. So, God is a God. God spoke at a particular moment in time to a particular group of people. God is a God of redemption, and He wants to redeem people and put them on the path of wholeness, just as He wanted the nation of Israel to be redeemed and whole again. So the context was clearly the people of Israel in exile. Because of the punishment God gave to them for their idolatrous behavior and their rebellion against the holy God. So God does indeed have a good plan for the Israelites, and it is a plan that will give them hope and a prospering future. So if you read the 7th verse, God wanted them to prosper in exile. But that was not what the Israelites wanted to hear, because they wanted to go home to their own land, Israel. These Israelites did not like the prophecy was sent by Jeremiah. Because verse 10 clearly says, God says that He would fulfill this after 70 years are completed in Babylon. That means that present generation who got the letter from prophet Jeremiah won't go back. They won't live their life. 70 years they're gone, all of them. And their children probably would return later. So they didn't like that prophecy at all. They wanted to go home. So, as we live in this chaotic world, we need to remember that perseverance through these trials, but not to escape them entirely. So the lesson we take from the prophecy of Jeremiah to the people in exile in Babylon: hang on, pray for them, flourish in Babylon, but I'll bring you back one day. So He never took them out of their misery, but allowed them to go through and assimilate in the process. So that's what He said. That God will not take us out of our chaotic world. He placed us for some reason, and He is going to give us the strength to go through whatever situation we are going in. So today we notice a growing departure from a Christian doctrine, the sovereignty of God. So what we learn from this lesson is the sovereignty of God. The sovereignty of God is foundational to everything we believe as Christians. What it means, sovereignty of God? It means that God is all-knowing, in total control, and has the absolute right to do all things according to His good pleasure, not according to our own desires and expectations. God does it for His glory, because He is in total control. If God is not sovereign, He is not worthy of worship. If God is not in total control, then I cannot trust Him with every part of my life. If God does not have authority, God can't direct everything according to His purposes. So, only an omnipotent, omniscient, sovereign God could orchestrate all things according to His plan, purpose, and place in history. So for the Israelites, He was telling them, I am a sovereign God. I know what I'm going to do. You be there for 70 years. Of course, a lot of people will die in the process. After 70 years, I will bring them back. Because Daniel says the same thing in his prophecy, after 70 years. So, What is there for us in the 11th verse, if you just focus only on 11th verse? Jeremiah says, God has planned for us. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. This is for the people of Israel, not to an individual. So don't adopt it as an individual promise. But God still, we can use this God's promise to our life. So first one, these plans I have for you, declares the Lord. So this morning we are greatly encouraged to understand that God has a plan for each of us as we live out our life. So we cannot comprehend God's plan for our life, but as Christians we do understand that part of that. Non-believers cannot understand God's plan for them, because we need to know God through His Scripture and to understand Him as a sovereign God, and then we can relate to that sovereign God. Whatever is happening in our life, but He has a plan for every one of us. So God does use non-believers for His great purpose at the same time in our life. So we are dealing with a lot of non-believers in our jobs, in every place. They are not believers like us. But God uses them for us, to help us. It's a process. And it's a combination. That's what He is doing. Babylon, the king of Babylon is a Gentile king. So God is using him to prosper the people of Israel. They should not think, because these non-believers should not think that everything is happening in their life because of their intelligence, wisdom, money, power, and own efforts, because they don't know the sovereign God. But they need to understand they happen because God places them in their life, all those things. We should remember that nothing surprises God because He is a sovereign God. And God is sovereign, and He can see all of our tomorrows and perfectly design them. So, when He says, I have plans for you, as individuals, we can understand that He has plans to prosper us, to place us in a place in our lives at this moment, and He keeps on bringing others into our life to understand our place in history. Then He says, God has a purpose for us. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. So the second part is plans to prosper you and not to harm you. So God's plans have a purpose for every human being. Most importantly, the believers must understand that He has the purpose for our lives too. And God was telling the Jewish exiles that He has a purpose for their captivity in a foreign land. They were there for a purpose placed by God at that point of time in history. So, we all know that our life will always have both pain and pleasure. We go through both of them. Because God is a sovereign God, He knows what is going on. When there is pain, He knows it. When there is pleasure, He knows it. But we know as Christians that God brings those things into our life, because there is a purpose for everything that God does in our life. But only a believer knows that this is a fallen and sinful world, and pain knocks at every life that we have today. Every day. Pain knocks at our door because we live in a sinful world. God knows about it. Sometimes He spares us, sometimes He doesn't, because of His greater purpose. So the believer understands that the Lord has a purpose for a better future. We don't know what it is because we only see in a very limited angle or influence, sphere, but God knows everything. He has a purpose for us as He has a purpose for the Jewish nation. Also, He has a purpose for everybody. Then, the last one is, God has a place for us. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. So God has a plan for each of us to have a place in His divine future. So also the people of Israel in exile, they have a hope and a place in future because they're going to come back after 70 years. Not those who are hearing that letter, read to them, but those after them, because 70 years is a long period of time at that point in human history. So we have to remember that we are born in this particular time in the human history. I was born in 1946, not in 1947, of course. Others born in 1947, and some not in 2000. That's it. 1946 was my designated time. God said, you are going to be there on this planet Earth. So also each and every one of us. He placed us at a particular time in human history. And He will take us out at a particular time in human history. Nothing we can do about that. Nothing we can do when we come into this world. Nothing we can do when we depart from this world. But He has a purpose and a place for us in that our present history in life. So in His sovereign power, God chose the time and place for each human being. We cannot question them. God is sovereign, Lord. Keep that in mind always. God is a sovereign God. He knows what He's doing. He knows what He's doing with each and every individual, with the nations, with the people of Israel. He brought them back and made them a nation again after so many. 1947 they came back and formed the country in 1948. So many hundreds and thousands of years they came back and became the people of Israel. So there must be something God wishes to accomplish through our life. He wanted definitely to accomplish something out of our life. He will reveal it to us if we have the ears and the heart to listen to God. Our life is not just a daily routine that we go through. It's not. A believer, especially a believer, is not just a daily routine that we go through. Everything that happens in our life fits into God's eternal design. So whatever happening in our life, of course we plan. Benson is planning to go on 15th, Jackie and Anna are going. But that it might have been already fits into God's design and His plans and purpose to take you at the particular time to a place for giving you the benefit of relaxation and a loving time with the loved ones. So He brings us back again. So what we are planning, but God approves those plans if it fits into His plans. A believer. We should never lose sight of the fact that God has placed us for specific reason in life. If not, we would have been born some other time in world's history. So my simple conclusion. We are living through defining moments of world history. We have never seen such chaos and calamity. and social evil like it never happened before. Always the right is being made wrong. Wrong is being made right. Even German government approved same-sex marriage. And transgenders are taking more and more strength every day. We never heard these things some 20 years before. Never heard of them. See how things are changing and how that will affect our children. Be careful, Anna and Benjamin, as they're growing up. What is being influenced in the schools is horrible, especially in the public schools. Christian school at least have some kind of a protection, but not in public schools. They're teaching all nonsense. By the time they grow up, they are already radicalized, indoctrinated. And they are already feeding those little minds. They are not male and female, but there is a different sex too. They don't want it, but they are teaching them. So we are living through very defining moments in world history. And many do not understand God's plans and purpose because they do not want to participate. That's the problem. We don't want to participate in God's design and perfect plan. So we got to be very careful as Christian parents. Our time is over. We know what is right and what is wrong. But those younger minds are still battling with what is right and what is wrong. So as parents, we need to teach them every day what is the right way, what is the wrong way, what is biblical, what is unbiblical. They will never forget later. Like God assured the Jewish exiles in Babylon to prosper in exile, He is calling us to trust Him where we are placed in our life today. Yes, we go through pain and pleasures. So God has placed us for specific purpose and plans in times we live today. So how can we understand that design of God in our life? Yes, we may ask that question. How can we know what God's plans and purposes are? I thought about only one simple biblical understanding given to us by the Lord Himself. Only when we seek His kingdom first, we will be able to grasp our place in divine future. So only when we seek His kingdom first, the Lord said, I will add everything to you. The pagans run after them, but I will give it to you. But seek my first kingdom. Seek my first kingdom first, then everything will be added to you. And Lord Jesus said very interesting thing in 14th chapter. He's going to heaven to prepare a place for us. Nobody has ever said that. No religious leader has said that. No God has said that of the religions. Only Jesus said, I'm going there. I will prepare a place for you. So I am putting that. John 14:2. My Father's house has many rooms. If there were not so, would have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that ye also may be where I am. That's our Independence Day. That we are not confined to this world. Our freedom comes when the Lord takes us to His place. That our independence from all things that we'll go through. And the Lord said, I will take you. As our country is enjoying the freedom for the past 240 years, I believe. And our independence is not in this life. We are shackled to this life, but God has a design for us. He placed us for a particular reason, for a particular time, we need to live in this world seeking God's kingdom first. And one day, He's going to take us back to His place, which He has already prepared for us. So as we participate in the Lord's Supper, may we be reminded that the Lord asked us, taught us to seek His kingdom first in every aspect of our life. Then everything He will give it to us, no matter what we go through. In pain, He will give us perseverance. In pleasures, He will give us the conscience to be careful, not to overdo it. So, let's spend a couple of minutes in silence to look back and seek God's forgiveness if we have done anything wrong, contrary to His will and purpose.